They laughed at her yes. Mocked her, dismissed her, called her a dreamer, a woman out of place, out of time, too bold, too mystical, too sure of herself in a world that asked women to be quiet, small, agreeable. But Florence Scovel Shinn didn't flinch, didn't fade, didn't fold, because deep in her soul, even before the world could see it, she had already manifested something larger than their doubts. And if you're hearing this now, it means some part of you is ready to do the same, because Florence's story isn't just a historical tale. It's a mirror, it's a match, it's a movement calling your name, and her journey begins not with applause, not with admiration, but with resistance, with rejection, with ridicule, because the truth is way out. Most people will laugh before they listen. Most people will doubt before they believe, and most people only see the miracle after it manifests. But Florence, oh Florence, she knew the miracle was born the moment the word was spoken, the moment the vision was held, the moment the soul said yes. And so they laughed when she said words create reality. They laughed when she said your speech becomes your substance. They laughed when she said your subconscious mind is the soil and your affirmations are the seeds. But Florence didn't need them to believe. She needed only one thing: alignment with spiritual law, and she found it, over and over again, in the silence, in the scripture, in the soul deep knowing that your word is your wand. That thought is power, and power is thought aligned with divine intention, and so while others taught fear, she taught faith. While others taught hardship, she taught harmony. While others relied on outer facts, she lived by inner truth. And this truth didn't come easily, because before the teacher, there was the seeker. Before the certainty, there was the struggle, and Florence knew both well. Born in 1871, raised in a time where women were taught their value came from obedience, not originality, she chose instead to become an artist, a creator, a voice, a force. And that alone made them uncomfortable. A woman of vision in a society of convention. But Florence didn't live for comfort, she lived for conviction. And when her marriage ended, they said she'd fall apart. When her income vanished, they said she'd fade. When she began writing about metaphysical law, they said she'd lose credibility. But the more they doubted, the clearer her voice became, because she had lived what she taught. She had spoken her way back from poverty, declared her way into abundance, affirmed her way into healing. And over time, the laughter turned into letters from people around the world saying, "Florence, your words healed me. Florence, your book changed my life. Florence, I manifested what they said was impossible." And the ones who once dismissed her now leaned in close, hungry for the secrets she had once been mocked for sharing. But Florence never sought revenge. She sought revelation, and revelation came in many forms. In the affirmations she wrote down by candlelight, in the prayers she spoke over clients, in the quiet conviction that the law of prosperity is as real and as consistent as the law of gravity. And if you're hearing this, it means you too are ready to rise above opinion, to stop asking for permission, to stop shrinking to fit the stories others projected onto you. Because Florence's story is your story. It's the story of awakening, of declaring instead of doubting, of obeying intuition over insecurity, of knowing that yes, they may laugh, yes, they may question, yes, they may turn away. But if you stay aligned, if you speak your good into being, if you declare that divine substance flows to you and through you, the law will not fail you. The law cannot fail you, because spiritual law is impersonal. It responds to belief, not background, to frequency, not familiarity. And Florence proved this not in theory but in testimony, not in ideas but in outcomes. And now she asks you, will you trust what's unfolding, even if they don't yet understand it? Will you walk with faith even when facts try to scare you? Will you speak life even when the world speaks fear? Because that's the path, the real path, the Florence path, and you are on it now, and this is your sign to keep going. And so with time, the laughter dimmed and the legacy rose. Florence Scovel Shinn, once dismissed by publishers, side-eyed by skeptics, and misunderstood by the religious elite, stood now as a quiet lighthouse, her teachings circulating through prayer circles, whispered in therapy sessions, shared between mothers and daughters, passed like sacred fire through generations of seekers who had been waiting, not for answers that came from outside, but for permission to trust what they already knew within. And even in her final years, Florence did not retire from teaching, for her life was not a career but a calling, and she continued to counsel, to affirm, to speak with fierce softness, to tell each person who crossed her path that the law of prosperity, the law of health, the law of love, the law of harmony, were already etched into their being, not earned through suffering but activated through alignment. And her very presence was a vibration of that truth. And she would remind you even now, as her story unfolds in your ears, that you are not just hearing her journey. You are remembering your own, that the divine pattern of wealth, peace, and joy is already within you, waiting not for the perfect timing, but for perfect trust. And as Florence spoke, her words became more than sound. They became scripture for the soul, medicine for the mind, and miracles for the material. And people who had been hopeless found faith again, not because Florence performed for them, but because she reminded them who they were beneath the noise of fear, beneath the patterns of lack, beneath the crust of limitation that society had placed on them. And even when her body began to slow, even when the crowds grew, even when her name began to spread far beyond her own city, she remained the same, rooted, generous, spiritually exact. And when she passed in 1940, it was not an ending. It was an expansion, for her words had already taken on a life of their own, and now, even more than a century later, those words continue to ripple, to echo, to awaken. And it is you they are awakening now, not by chance, not by luck, but by divine design, because everything Florence said about words being wands, about the soul commanding form, about spiritual law being real and exact and eternal, is still true, especially now, in a world where doubt has become fashionable and fear is sold like a drug. And that's why her story matters more than ever, because her laughter-laced beginning proves that your current reality is not your final chapter, that mockery means nothing when God has marked you for miracles. And if Florence could manifest global influence in a single self-published book, from a single stubborn belief in spiritual truth, then what is possible for you? What can happen if you speak your word, not once but daily? What will shift if you say, I do not resist this situation, I put it in the hands of infinite love and wisdom and let the divine idea now come to pass? And actually expect an answer. Florence would say, watch the law work. And it does work. It always works, not on your timeline but on divine timing, not according to the world's conditions, but according to your spiritual conviction. And you, yes you, are being invited to stop waiting for signs and start becoming one, to stop seeking validation and start commanding demonstration, to stop trying to be accepted and start activating your word. Because when Florence wrote, she wasn't trying to create a trend. She was revealing a timeless truth, one she learned through struggle, through heartbreak, through laughter she turned into fire. And that truth is this: the game of life is a game of boomerangs. Our thoughts, deeds, and words return to us sooner or later with astounding accuracy. Which means your life is not random. It is a mirror. And the moment you change your inner image, your outer world must obey, and Florence proved it time and time again. With widows and orphans and businessmen and artists and everyday people like you, who dared to believe that there was something sacred in them, something that didn't need fixing, only remembering. And she would ask you now, are you remembering yet? Are you feeling that tug in your spirit that says there's more, not just more money, more love, more peace, but more you, more soul, more presence, more purpose? And that more is not in the future, it's in this now, and you activate it not by effort but by alignment, not by pushing but by speaking, not by hoping but by knowing. And as Florence taught her students, she's teaching you now: speak only what you want multiplied. Give energy only to what you wish to expand, and never speak against your own prosperity, not in jest, not in fear, not in sarcasm, for the subconscious does not know jokes, it only knows vibration, and Florence's vibration was exact, loving, unwavering, and because of that, she created a wave that never stopped moving, and now you are that wave, and the question is not, will it work for me? But, will I work the law as faithfully as she did? Because the law is not broken, the law has never failed. It is we who forget, we who doubt, we who delay, and Florence would say, delay nothing. Speak now, claim now, move now, trust now. For what is yours by divine right cannot be taken, cannot be lost, cannot be missed when you move in oneness with spiritual authority. And so the circle closes, the story completes, not with a period but with a comma. Because you are the continuation, the next breath of this work, the next voice to rise through the noise, the next soul to be laughed at and later revered. Because when your manifestation arrives, they will forget they doubted, but you will remember you never stopped believing. And Florence, wherever she is now in the higher dimensions of spirit, would nod gently and say, well done, beloved, you remembered, you believed, you became the demonstration. And so it grew. Florence's voice, once quiet and questioned, became a current, a spiritual pulse, a rising tide that swept through minds that were once burdened with fear and lack and struggle. And as the pages of her teachings fluttered from hand to hand, house to house, continent to continent, something sacred began to happen. Something Florence had always known would happen, The invisible law she honored began to awaken in the lives of others. And as people began to speak the words she gave them, they discovered what she had always declaring, that the universe listens, that the divine is precise, that no spoken word is wasted, and no deep belief goes unanswered. And suddenly she was no longer just the woman they laughed at. She was the one they looked for, the one they quoted, the one they wrote to when nothing else worked, because her books were filled with theories or distant ideals. They were filled with demonstrations, with real-life miracles that bloomed from seemingly impossible conditions, and she would say again and again, before the demonstration comes the conviction, meaning that when you truly believe, when your inner word is firm and fearless, then and only then does the outer world obey. And the people who used to scoff at affirmations began whispering them in moments of crisis, began clutching them like lifelines, began saying, I cast this burden on the Christ within, and I go free. And finding, to their shock and relief, that it worked, that the burden lifted, that the way opened, and the impossible thing became possible. And Florence never shouted, never forced, never needed to prove anything. Because truth proves itself, and her truth was rooted in spiritual law, not public opinion. And while the world continued to chase success with force, she showed that success is a vibration, that wealth is a frequency, that supply is not earned by sweat but claimed by alignment. And if you understand that, if even one part of your soul tingles when you hear that, then Florence's story is already your inheritance, already knocking at your door. And perhaps now is your moment to open it, to choose to believe not because you've seen proof, but because you know that proof always follows principle. And Florence taught principle with elegance, with clarity, with a conviction that cut through centuries of doubt. And still she faced opposition, for even as her name grew, her wisdom rippled out. The spiritual gatekeepers, the traditionalists, the rigid minds said, this isn't of the church. But Florence knew it was of spirit, and spirit answers to no institution. And she kept going, kept speaking of the fourth dimension, the realm of divine supply, where everything you want already exists and is waiting for you to claim it, not with desperation, but with dominion. And she would often say, man's word is his wand filled with magic and power. And she believed in the sacredness of every syllable. So she taught people to speak with intention, to speak as if they were planting gardens with their language, to stop saying, I can't afford it, and instead say, infinite supply is mine here and now. And she saw the results. Rent paid in hours, jobs offered from nowhere, fevers breaking after one prayer, marriages healed by one affirmation, legal troubles reversed in days. And each miracle became a seed for more belief, and the circle widened. And soon Florence was no longer just teaching the desperate. She was awakening the dormant, the gifted, the sensitive souls who had long felt different, misfit, out of step with the noise of the world. And to them she said, you're not wrong. You're intuitive, you're called. You're wired to work with the invisible. And if you protect your vibration, miracles will chase you down. And to the women who had been silenced, suppressed, told to sit quietly while their dreams faded, Florence gave the permission no one else would, to speak boldly, to write openly, to believe fiercely in their divine right to wealth and joy and wholeness. And though she never sought fame, her impact was magnetic, unstoppable, because she wasn't speaking from ego. She was speaking from law, and law is impersonal, precise, and cannot be denied. And even now, decades after her passing, people are still discovering her for the first time, and feeling as if she's been waiting for them, whispering through the pages, beloved, you are more powerful than you've been told. And if you're here now, it means you were meant to hear this, meant to awaken something you didn't know was sleeping, meant to reclaim the power of your voice, your word, your energy. And maybe you've been laughed at too, mocked for saying your desires out loud, made fun of for writing affirmations on sticky notes, or hiding intentions in your journal, or whispering prayers to the night. But Florence would look you in the eye and saying, keep going, child of God, keep speaking, keep expecting, keep walking as if what you seek is seeking you, because it is. And every story of hers, every teaching, every miracle was meant to be passed down to you, not as a myth but as a model, a reminder that spirit doesn't play favorites. And if the law worked for her, it must work for you, because spiritual law has no bias, no limitation, only alignment. And Florence aligned so completely that her life became proof. Proof that you don't need to come from money to be wealthy, that you don't need approval to be chosen, that you don't need a degree to teach truth. And this is your moment to remember that truth for yourself, to stop looking outward, and return to the divine blueprint inside you, the one that already knows how to heal, how to create, how to receive. And if you doubt it, Just say her words, even quietly. I now draw from the abundance of the spheres my immediate and endless supply. And see what shifts, feel what moves, and know that she would smile now. Not because she wants praise, but because she knows what happens next. Because when the laughter fades and the demonstration comes, you become undeniable too. And so it continued, Florence, standing tall not because the world lifted her, but because she chose not to sink beneath it, because the spirit within her was larger than the voices around her. And when they laughed, when they shrugged her off as eccentric, delusional, even blasphemous for daring to say that words create worlds and thought becomes form, she kept writing, she kept teaching, she kept proclaiming divine law with the kind of quiet, magnetic certainty that makes people stop and listen even when they don't understand. And this is the turning point, the sacred shift. The space between the laughter and the legacy, the moment when Florence sat down alone, without fame, without funding, with nothing but faith and the fire of inner instruction, and wrote what the world wasn't ready to hear, but what their souls were desperate for. And that was the game of life and how to play it, a book that would one day be called a metaphysical classic, but when she wrote it, there were no guarantees, no publishers knocking at her door, no promises of success, and yet she moved forward anyway, printed it herself, held the first copy in her hands with tears and triumph, knowing that what she had birthed would outlive her body, knowing that once the words left her lips, the law would carry them where they needed to go. And now I ask you, what have you been called to write, say, birth, share, and are you letting fear delay it? Florence didn't wait for approval, she moved with obedience, and because of that, the game of life found its way into the hands of seekers, skeptics, wanderers, and warriors, and her words, simple, sharp, spiritual, began to echo in hearts and households around the world. Words like, faith knows it has already received and acts accordingly. Words like, your word is your wand. Words like, before the demonstration comes the conviction. And these weren't just phrases. They were lifelines, spiritual technologies, keys that unlocked minds and mended broken places, and soon letters began to pour in, real stories, powerful testimonies, people who read her words and saw doors open, debts cleared, diseases healed, relationships restored, careers aligned, children born, money received unexpectedly. Not because Florence was magic, but because the law she taught was immutable, divine, ever responding to consciousness. And here's where it becomes real for you, dear listener, because this is not just her story, it's a blueprint, a pattern, an invitation for your own breakthrough, your own demonstration. And if you've ever been laughed at for your dreams, for your vision, for believing something greater is possible, Florence knows how that feels. And she would tell you now, do not talk about your demonstration until it is manifested. Protect the seed while it is growing, guard your word while it is taking form, and walk as if it is already done. Because the unseen always precedes the seen, and your faith is forming things in silence. And Florence didn't just speak these truths, she lived them. And when people came to her, broken and stuck and terrified, she gave them the one thing most had never been given: authority over their own energy, dominion over their own thoughts, power in their own mouth. And she gave them affirmations not as cliches but as sacred prescriptions, statements like, I now draw from the abundance of the spheres my immediate and endless supply. Or, there is nothing to fear, for there is no power but God. And people said things shifted overnight, that money appeared without effort, that situations reversed in their favor, that hope returned like sunrise after storm, and Florence smiled quietly, not surprised, because she knew what she taught was not her invention but divine revelation. Ancient truth repackaged for a world that had forgotten who it really was. And that truth is still alive, pulsing in the very air around you right now. And if you pause, breathe, and speak it, you too will feel what her clients felt, that sudden peace, that holy electricity, that sacred sense that you are not alone, not powerless, not broken, but connected to a force that obeys belief, responds to rhythm, and never denies a soul that moves in faith. And still they laughed, yes, because the world has always ridiculed those who refuse to bow to limitation. But Florence never needed their laughter to stop. She only needed her message to spread, and spread it did, until women gathered in small rooms to hear her speak, until seekers memorized her lines, until letters crossed oceans just to say, thank you, Florence, you saved my life. And still, Florence kept it simple, kept it spiritual, kept it focused on the one power, the one law, the one voice inside each of us that says, I am aligned with the good that is mine by divine right. And that's the voice she wants you to hear now, because if you're watching this, it's not random. It's not entertainment, it's a reminder, a reconnection, A revival of the truth you once knew, that your word still carries weight, that your thoughts are sacred commands, that your desires are not accidents but assignments, and yes, they may laugh, yes, they may roll their eyes, yes, they may say you're not AV, but Florence would say, let them laugh, because when your demonstration arrives, they'll come asking how you did it, and you'll smile, not in pride, but in peace, knowing you walked the same path Florence did, the path of inner law, of invisible wealth, of unwavering faith, and now that same power is in your hands.